Well, good morning, everybody. In today's video, we're going to cover some of the big events that happened over the weekend, including some flooding. We'll talk about Lee. There's Lee, what's left of Lee, kind of exiting here out of the Northeast. We're going to talk about some of the new forecast model trends that really showed up, and we're going to change the precipitation patterns across the country. And at the very end of this, I've got some new long-range stuff. So what we're looking at here is yesterday's satellite imagery. And as we're about to get a brand new image from this morning, watch this flip over here. Every about 4.5 minutes, we get a new image. We're going to see where this pattern is beginning to take its biggest shifts, because we are just past the heart of the hurricane season. So here's the newest data. And one of the areas I'm going to be watching early today is going to be right here in this area. So you can see there is a large area of convection just off the coast, and it's expected to move up the east coast later on today. And then after that, late this week on Friday into Saturday, I'm going to watch this same area again for some of the newest tropical development. But I wanted to show you what happened on Sunday afternoon. So let's take you back in time here and have a look here at the satellite imagery. We watched a deep low that really showed up and moved across Illinois and Indiana, producing some locally very heavy rainfall. There was some flooding in Chicago, for example, yesterday. But you can also see the smoke that was here in the central United States. This, again, is just remnant smoke from the Canadian wildfires. You can also see underneath the cloud cover here in parts of Montana, they had some downslope winds yesterday, some stronger downslope winds, and produced just some blowing smoke and dust in this area. And then notice some of the deep convection that we got out of parts of Arizona and New Mexico. So there's just a lot of things to start to step back and discuss about this particular satellite animation, but it's all about where it's going. So let's give you some perspective just to see what happened this weekend. Last 72 hours through 5 a.m. this morning, total accumulated precipitation. So again, we saw more heavy rain this weekend coming through Texas. We saw the front slide through the Midwest, delivering some better rain, and then that low curl up here almost over the Chicagoland area, locally delivering some heavy rain. But take a look at the front. This is the second one that came through to help guide Lee and keep Lee out from the parts of the interior of New England. But you can see here over the weekend the total rainfall amounts that did come in from Lee, hitting parts of Massachusetts and parts of Maine relatively hard with some very heavy rainfall. Okay, what I want to do is stretch it out, though. This is the last 7 days. And I love this map. I'm glad to make it, but sometimes it's a bit deceiving. And I don't know if it's my color bar or what, but what I need to do on this map is to remove everything below a ½ inch. So you've seen me do this before. Let's just do it real quick here. So this is our last 7 days now, but I've got everything less than a ½ inch out. We're just trying to assess where we've seen some of the heaviest rainfall to reverse some of the longer standing drought issues. So I'm thinking about Texas specifically. I'm thinking about parts of the Midwest. We've not developed a lot of drought across the east this summer, this whole year, in fact, but it did develop late in the season here in a big way. We've talked extensively about it. So we're just kind of getting the latest updates here, but some locally very heavy rainfall in the last week, and the models did a pretty good job predicting this. Now, I say that, and some of you are probably like, wait a minute, what if I'm right in this part of the Panhandle or here just north of Dallas? Models were more aggressive on the rainfall over a larger area, but we can see here that some of those holes weren't filled in overall with this particular setup. And just broader context, we're just keeping an eye on this late summer into early fall soil moisture. And the newest data from NASA looking at the soil moisture percentile, we continue to see much of the Missouri, the Mississippi, and Ohio basin with very low soil moisture. Notice parts of northern Montana, getting up into the Red River Valley of the north. This has been extremely dry as of late. We can watch the, this part of the Pacific Northwest here along parts of coastal Washington, Oregon. I'm also keeping an eye here and just south of D.C. and the whole of Virginia here, getting North Carolina. And then we can't ignore what still sits along our Gulf Coast, where we've seen a real lack of activity in terms of hurricanes. I know Idalia went through here, but there's not been a hurricane or anything that's really come into Louisiana or Mississippi. And that's despite such a tremendous amount of discussion that we had earlier in the year about how primed the Gulf of Mexico has been. But thinking about this, I did see several videos over the weekend just to folks out there kind of taking a good look at the Mississippi River. We've been talking about it now for a while, just watching those river levels come down. And I will say this, some of the weekend rainfall and last week's rainfall is starting to get into the river. And you can see that right now we are only I say, at 8.3 feet below low stage right over here. But before we got into the weekend, we were over 10 feet below low stage right here for just temporarily, right at that spot right down there, 10.12 feet. And the concern is that a year ago, we watched it continue to drop off. And so that's why we're going to continue to cover this, because it is so important to ag in the central part of the United States. All right. So with that kind of as a backdrop, let's talk about what changed. We've now seen wetter conditions coming in to the west, specifically the Pacific Northwest. We are watching one system late this week kind of pop out into the central United States. There's some severe weather risk early tomorrow in this part of Oklahoma and Texas. And then late this week, as this low finally digs in and pops out right here, we're going to watch for a corridor to open that could produce some strong to severe weather. We went drier in the forecast in this region, and we're watching again late this week a second round of potentially very heavy rainfall. And the big questions we have are how far inland is this going to make it into the Carolinas and Virginia before moving toward the northeast. It will be tropical, I think, in nature to begin with, but it'll likely make a subtropical transition. Now again, look at down here, right along our Gulf Coast. Now we've watched southern Mississippi, Louisiana, and Texas just struggle with drought all summer long. And summer is almost over, according, when you look at, astronomical summer, it's about done. It'll end this Saturday morning. I think the equinox is like 1 a.m. Saturday morning Central Time. But we'll watch out for that and talk about that change later. But dry, just very dry right now in the Gulf. And we continue to see this be a major issue. So where's the tropical activity this week? Well, we have Nigel up to Category 1. It is expected to become a major hurricane, but stay out to open ocean. Okay, we have an area behind it. It's got a 70% chance of developing, so a new African easterly wave. And we're going to watch this area late this week. So remember, there's today's storm system that we're going to watch today and tomorrow, and then another setup late in the week here, just right off the southeast coast. All right. So let's go take a look at it. This is the latest we've got in terms of modeling the European ensemble and its forecast tracks. So it's just basically where the European model is producing tropical low pressure. So this is Nigel, right? This is the next African easterly wave that we're going to be discussing. I just hope we're not discussing it for 17 days like we did with Hurricane Lee. But you notice late in the forecast time period, watch right here. This is at the end of the week. There it is. End of the week, early next week, we got a system that could pop out right here. I think it'll make a pretty quick transition to subtropical, but we got to go out there and look at it anyway. And then you notice, though, the Gulf of Mexico, nothing, just nothing going on right now. So let's just use that as the backdrop for this animation. This is the latest European model run, total precipitation. Front cleared the East Coast last night. So this is going forward. We're going to watch this low right up along that cold front and then get right into parts of New England. So this is some of the rainfall I think some of these folks were expecting from Lee. It's now coming up from the south from the next tropical system through there. I will be watching early this week. There's some rain that's coming right here along I-80, and then we're going to keep an eye on Tuesday, I think Tuesday night, Wednesday morning, that time frame, general time frame for some severe weather down here across parts of Oklahoma. Now, this is through Wednesday, and let me just show you what happens late this week. There it is. See this thing right here? Now watch. If I take you back, you can almost see something curling up right there. There's a deep low, big cutoff low that's going to show up there. And what's going to happen is the flow around it, it's going to do something like that. Okay? So we start to see, as we go from Thursday to Friday, wetter conditions coming into the Dakotas, getting into southern Manitoba, into parts of western Ontario. And while that's going on, there's another low sitting right here, the one we were talking about watching late in the week, more of tropical origin initially before that subtropical transition that moves up the east. So as we have one wave ejecting into the plains late this week, adding heavy rains to the central plains of the United States, we have a coastal low moving up. And the pattern sitting on top of this is quite fascinating to look at, because at the very end of it, this is early next week, we start to see a deeper trough digging into the west. And this is a big transition from what I thought we would see even just a week ago. So let's, there it is. There's your 10-day run from the European model. It's always nuanced. It's not going to be perfect, but it gives us an idea. Hey, watch here, watch the low there, watch the plains, some rain in the Midwest, and a coastal system to be keep an eye on. That's the summary of what I got for you. Now, I told you it's a very interesting pattern to think about here. And what I'm really getting into here is once we get out past Tuesday into Wednesday, you're looking right down on the North Pole. By the time we get into Friday, there's a few things to keep an eye on. We develop ridging here, and ridging there. Now, these three areas of ridges means we're going to get troughs in between. And what this is doing to the pattern is it's really setting us up for more activity in the west coast with these troughs that just, look at this, see this deep one? But they sneak underneath the larger ridge here. So there's one, we have our second one that's sitting up here, and then I guess if you just kind of keep following around, excuse me, our third one's over the Aleutian Islands. Now, sometimes when you get a pattern that gets these long waves in it, see how long they are? 1, 2, 3, okay? They tend to slow down and they tend to get stuck. And what I don't like is if this ridge builds up into Hudson Bay, we could get these lows sneaking underneath it and sticking around there for a while. Now, it's not that I don't like it. It's just something that says, hey, the pattern might get slowed down a bit overall with this. So this is going to be the mainstay of the discussion as we work our way through the next 10 to 15 days, because out there in the next week, playing out to next Wednesday, Thursday. In fact, I'll stop it at day 10. 1, 2, 3. I guess I renumbered those 1, 2, and 3. But you see the troughs that are now forecast to kind of flank North America because of that. Okay. So what do we have right now? Today's all hazards weather map. We have a flood watch that's out for New England. Again, this is the system that's coming up like this. We do have red flag warnings again for parts of Montana, the Columbia Basin, and parts of southwestern Oregon here. And this is, again, going to be coming from downslope winds. Take a look at it here. This is the midday winds today. It's going to get windy in through here. We're going to have gusts coming off the mountains, 30, 40, maybe 50 miles an hour. And we've certainly got some, potent winds that are going to be very dry in this area and hot. So what happens is this is the surface flow. This is the flow above. And this is where the action is going to happen, because here is a small subtropical ridge. Here is all that flow we mentioned at the end of last week, setting things up for this week. And then we're going to watch whatever is developing here today get pulled quickly to the north while Nigel spins out here in the open ocean. Okay, so just take a look at these arrows. Watch for something to sneak over the top of this ridge here while this deeper low comes down and gets cut off right here in the forecast pattern, okay? I'm going to show it to you in a map of vorticity, and I love these maps. So what's colored for you here is spin, counterclockwise spin in the atmosphere. So as we play through Monday and get into Tuesday, this is the first couple things I'm going to watch. Tuesday afternoon, there's a shortwave here, and there was one that came through here. Now, they don't look like much, do they? But these are some of the things that are just needed in summer to trigger storms. So what we're going to see is this lead shortwave, Monday into Tuesday, giving some rain on I-80. The secondary shortwave, the one down to the south, on Tuesday night, ripping off some severe storms. The deeper waves, look at this one. This comes in by Thursday, completely cut off from the flow. So the flow's way up here. And then this is the one that's going to start to send some momentum out into the plains late this week. And then it itself will eject by the weekend. And by that time, we're watching this. So see, this is how we kind of diagnose the upper levels of the atmosphere. And these are the clues, because what we watch for in this, again, a quick review, is you're going to watch for anywhere where we advect or move these ribbons of vorticity to a place where there's not vorticity, or even sometimes what we call negative vorticity, which means clockwise spin. That triggers rising motion in the atmosphere. If you want me to explain how, it's fun how it does it. I won't do it today, but we'll put in a fun video at some point to tell you why spin makes air rise. And for those of you that study physics, think right-hand rule. There's some fun stuff in here. There's also other stuff going on. It's not just that, but there's some fun stuff here. Okay, quit nerding out here and just get back to the forecast. Tomorrow, this is what I'm watching for, day 2 on the 19th, for some severe weather. And if we go look at our high-res models, we're going to pick this up at 8 a.m. You're going to see all of those pieces I just mentioned. Front cleared the Carolinas last night. Here it is. But there is this region of baroclinicity. That's what we call it, sitting off the coast. And that's why later today we're going to watch for heavy rain to be on the northern side of a low that's going to form right here. So there it is. There's going to be some isolated showers throughout the day today on the backside of this. And we're going to watch again for storms to blow up on that same flow you saw yesterday over parts of New Mexico, parts of Colorado, Arizona, and Utah. Now, this is Monday evening, isolated storms in the northwest as well. As we got into where that first wave moved out, remember the one north of I-80, this is early Tuesday morning, getting through the day on Tuesday. So it's sitting right there just north and along of I-80, delivering some more rain into this region, or chances of rain. But then throughout the day on Tuesday, our attention will turn back here in the evening to watch the risk of some stronger storms to show up. So remember, I said kind of Tuesday, Wednesday. That's because the timing of these could be overnight based upon current model evidence. So while lighter rain moves through parts of lower Michigan, we'll keep an eye Tuesday night into Wednesday morning down here in parts of the south and southern plains, as this low could, little meso low, show up here in the forecast. All right, from there, I got to show you the big models, the ones that run out 10 days and longer. European right, GFS left. Take note of both of them pretty well timed on the deep low that's going to deliver rain and give us the flood watch out for New England. We then see they both produce that I-80 setup here. Doesn't look as, like it does on the previous run because these are not convective allowing models, but it is there. And then we go into Tuesday night and you can see that the models are kicking off those storms here. Now let's go a little faster after this. This is now going into Wednesday and Thursday when the low cuts off over the Pacific Northwest. This is now Thursday night. See the first shortwave getting ejected out ahead of this? Storms in the northern plains. At the same time that happens, so we got two systems to watch. Remember, the deep low is cut off. It's moving out into Wyoming. There it is in both models. We're going to watch for storms along the southern plains by Friday, all the way in this area, central and southern plains, and then our low off the coast. Now, the GFS, which is over here, is much more aggressive with this low hitting the southeast coast. Oops, sorry about that. So notice that by Saturday morning, whereas the European model keeps the heaviest rains off of coastal North Carolina, the GFS is just soaking this area. Now you see here, that's the next front associated with the trough that kicked out of the west. So see, there's a lot going on. And as I play it forward, that one's going to curl up next weekend right over the central plains of the United States and the western Corn Belt. While that's going on, that tropical system, or transitioning to subtropical, is moving north along the coast. And then we can finish this up by watching finally the deeper troughs of low pressure by a week from now digging into the northwest. So that's it. I told you at the beginning, we got these areas of change that are happening, and that's kind of all of it summarized. So let's add up what this means in terms of total accumulated precip, but instead of looking at it in terms of a probability. So the chance of getting an inch through the next 5 days, so by Friday, we're going to see its highest here, and highest where we're watching for those severe storms. This is as the wave that digs into the west starts its kind of ejection into the plains. And after that, through the weekend, that's when it increases the heaviest rains here as it cuts off into a low that moves over the western Corn Belt. Taking this all the way out 10 days, biggest trends were this area went drier in the forecast. Wettest chances are here, western Corn Belt and down into this part of the southern plains. And then we're going to watch after that, keep an eye on the Pacific Northwest. Increasing chances of rainfall there. Okay, so snow. It's going to be cold enough for snow as that trough digs in. So we got some snow at the highest elevations here in the Rocky Mountains. And if we like to take a look at what's going on week 2 with the deeper trough coming into the western United States, that's the best chance of being above average in terms of precip. But as we talked about last week, even though we see these big ridges showing up, I still don't see the flow being blocked. So it stays open and moves. So week 2 forecasts are showing up wetter. The only model that doesn't see that is the GFS, which is just, I don't know what it's up to right now. But it's not in alignment with the other two forecast models. All right, what about temperatures as we move toward the end of this video here? We do have patchy frost we're expecting this week in parts of Wisconsin, the UP, but that deeper upper level low here is going to give us a lot of cold air, especially at higher elevations, supporting some of that snow. Let's take a look at the daily temperatures today. Another hot one up here in the northern plains and into Montana. Remember the strong, dry winds coming off the mountains, but 90s throughout the plains, cooler east and cooler west. Going into Tuesday, that heat moves here into the western Corn Belt. We then see by Wednesday it's moving into the upper Midwest. Watch the West really begin its cool down late this week as the trough digs in. A lot of late season warmth here in the midsection of the country by Friday. And this is going to set up things for the possibility of strong to severe storms late this week in the plains, though. All that warm air will destabilize the lower levels of the atmosphere. You know how this works, and it's going to kick off the risk of storms. But then we see by Sunday, the system trying to make its way out. So we've got some cooler air that's going to be behind it here overall. So what's the pattern up to now that we've seen these changes? Well, here's your next 5 days, and there's day 5 through 10. So we got this transition. See how things are still staying open. See it moving? And then we go out there day 10 through 15, And there's a lot of late season warmth expected in the models here, but we'll just watch to see what this upper level height pattern adjusts as the new model runs come out this week as we get a bit more information. So that's what you got though through the very beginning of October in terms of temperature anomalies. Okay, all of that to get to some bigger picture things. As we talked about on Friday, they could start planting in South America. Over the last 10 days, though, which would be the most recent rainfall that would be needed to get the planters rolling, we have been pretty dry here throughout a big section of Brazil, while all of the flooding has been closer to like the ridge that sits over Bolivia down into Paraguay. There's higher elevation here. It's been extremely wet into southern Brazil, down into Rio Grande do Sul, especially where there's been near record flooding down in this area. When we take a look at the root zone soil moisture map, now remember, this is a percentile, meaning it's comparing it to historical numbers. We're right about normal in much of Brazil, but that's okay. We have to have monsoonal moisture coming in here for planting to begin. There's still lingering drought issues in Argentina with this particular setup, and we've seen some very heavy rainfall into this corridor. So what's our problem with South America? Okay, a problem is this. This is where the ridge is. Remember last week we talked about this. This ridge has got to move farther to the north. If it does, what that will do is it'll take the flow on its northern side, which is here, and start to bring it in out of the tropics, which actually is the direction that comes in with all the moisture. So the moisture comes from here. This is the dry subtropics. So while all of that is happening and we've got this dry air coming in, the flow then smacks up against the higher elevation and runs down into a front here. So we're flooding southern Brazil, wet along the highlands here, but very dry in the interior. That's what this flow pattern is doing. So we add all that up. Here's your next 10 days from the European model. And while they may have enough to get going here in parts of western Mato Grosso, big sections of Brazil are still too dry to get some early planting progress done. We need to see a major change in that flow in order for those guys to have enough confidence to start planting. Meanwhile, more flooding down here in southern Brazil and almost down into Uruguay as well. Okay, all of this, let's now transition to bigger picture, longer range. The new CPC forecast came out on the probability of having El Nino or La Nina or neutral, and you can see that through November, December, January, 100% chance of having El Nino is still in the works. And it just continues to dominate once we get past the middle of winter. So we're going to be dealing with this for the next probably 9 months or so. The ocean temperatures right now just continue to show it. And what, again, I'll be worrying about all winter is to see right in through here, the subtropical jet. It's going to come in from some direction like this and roll across the southern tier of the U.S. We are expecting to see at times, the polar jet dive in over the top of it, something like that. So that split flow always has us worried about the western United States, specifically the Pacific Northwest. Now, as I look at this particular pattern, I'm going to remind you of something. That's just the general flow in winter when we have an El Nino. This says nothing about Arctic outbreaks. This, like the polar vortex, should it split or weaken at some point. This says nothing about time periods where the Pacific jet just extends. It'll do that no matter what. This says nothing about what may happen in the Atlantic with a big negative NAO block that could just race systems up the East Coast. This is just the general flow of an El Nino. And by the way, before I go into this last slide for you today, this is the cold water trail from Lee and Franklin, kind of added up here together. Kind of neat to see that on satellite. All right, this is what I wanted to get to. This is the newest update from the IRI forecasting group out of Columbia University. This probability forecast uses the NMME, and what they do is they stitch together maybe a more representative forecast based off of removing statistical biases. That's one way to look at it. So this is their global outlook for October, November, December, and I point out a few things here. Much drier in Indonesia and Australia. We see wetter in Southeast Asia, especially this part of China. Very wet throughout the Middle East. We could continue to see flooding in this area. Notice how dry northern parts of Brazil are. We talked about why the flow is coming in like this, but extremely wet as it exits here into southern Brazil. They continue to show that. But outside of this, what we notice coming back to North America here is we have got the likelihood of being quite wet all across our south and even into the Midwest because of the subtropical jet coming in at times like this. We talked significantly about that in the last few weeks. So this is just some further verification that that may be the case going forward. So speaking of going forward, what about November, December, January? So this now gets us out there to the end of fall and beginning of winter. Very typical El Nino forecast. Wet here, risks of drier conditions in the Pacific Northwest. And then right on into winter, this is December, January, February. Now what typically happens here, again, remember that flow splitting, subtropical component coming in like this. We're going to be watching for major drought reduction in Texas, Louisiana, and Mississippi. We're going to be watching out for the potential for an active winter to the south, maybe a little bit drier pockets as farther northwest you go, I think, in this flow. But, we just need to take this for what it is. It's an El Nino winter forecast. That's what the models have latched onto. And before I finish up, I do want to just take you back out global and just show you what we're looking at for December, January, February, the heart of Northern Hemisphere winter, Southern Hemisphere summer. We will watch South America carefully. We'll watch Australia carefully this winter as well. And if you want to see the temperatures being forecast, this is what the winter temperature pattern may be. So notice, across North America, across parts of Eastern Europe into Russia, most of Siberia here, not forecast to be above average in terms of temps. So this could be a very interesting winter for the Northern Hemisphere setting up. And with that, I've taken up too much of your time this Monday, but I appreciate you letting me talk through all of it. Have a great week. We'll talk tomorrow. Thanks.